All right, so a little bit of background about me. I'm a survivor of sexual assault myself as a child. Um, in the scheme of things, it was relatively light compared to some of the stories that I've heard. But I've been hearing sexual abuse stories from my friends since pretty much sixth grade onward when we all started to discuss these things. And it's not something that we discussed in depth. It was just one of those things that you now knew about your friend. And I really never knew what to say about these things, but it was so common and so unfortunate. And now that we have Ferals After Dark and we're encouraging people to discuss their sexual experiences and everything, I've noticed a trend. So this is why I've been wanting to do this. Not everybody has access to libraries or Amazon or whatever it may be. I try to get this book out there as much as I can. But this is the introduction from the author. It's a personal journey. Healing sex confronts a double taboo: women's sexuality and child abuse. Both subjects our culture would rather have us whisper about behind closed doors, or better yet, deny entirely. Yet for survivors, sex was the very site of attack. Children can be abused verbally, emotionally, physically, and through many forms of neglect. Why then sexual abuse? Why were we wounded in our most intimate places? I believe that sexual assault is an attempt to disempower, own, or destroy another. Alice Miller calls childhood sexual abuse soul murder, which is pretty hefty. Many survivors would agree with her. I often felt that my perpetrators were reaching for my soul, trying to take something from me that was long lost in themselves. Women's sexuality is the other piece of the double taboo. Sorry, I'm a mess. I'm not a professional. Women's sexuality is the other piece of the double taboo. What is so threatening about a sexually empowered woman? A sexually empowered woman is a woman who is embodied, whose sexual expression is a part of herself, and whose sex life is self-defined. A sexually empowered woman is able to make choices for herself. She's able to express consent and maintain boundaries that serve her. She can ask for what she wants. She becomes self-referential, meaning she trusts her own experiences and intelligence over external messages. Incest is the ultimate training in not trusting oneself. Becoming sexually empowered restores that self-trust. The wounds of children victimized by sexual abuse are so profoundly deep that most of us find ourselves turning away in denial or blaming the victims themselves. Yet 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are victims of childhood sexual abuse. Few of us can face this cultural disease. Whom might you see if you looked? Someone in your own family, your favorite soccer coach, your child's music teacher, or your next-door neighbor? I came to sex education and sexual healing through a very personal route. As is true for many women, my own sexual healing began while I was having sex with a boyfriend. This was a moment of clarity when I faced the fact that I had been sexually abused by my father and several family friends for much of my youth. I had no idea what was going on. I only knew that some internal boulder had been rolled away from the mouth of the cave and my history came pouring out. Thus, my healing journey began. I spent 2 years running from recovery before I finally surrendered to my healing. Before I finally faced the abuse, I experienced insomnia, an inability to eat, and a thick brick wall of depression that separated me from the world. The years that followed were horrible and miraculous. I found healing, devastation, loss, confrontation, a family falling apart and weaving partly together again. If you are healing from childhood sexual assault, you know exactly what I am talking about. You have stories of your own. During the years of abuse, my survival depended upon a strong spiritual connection, a natural talent for dissociating, and being a high achiever. When I began studying the effects of trauma on children's lives, I found that survivors usually fall into the over-underachiever camp. We are the really good kids or the really bad kids. Discovering this was a relief for me. As is true for many survivors, no one ever asked me what was up because I was doing so well. Actually, my second grade teacher did ask me why I was going to the bathroom so frequently. I had chronic vaginal and yeast infections. I didn't know what was causing the itching and pain, so I'd go to the bathroom a lot to check. Eventually, she pulled me aside and asked me what was going on. When I didn't say anything, she asked me to go home and talk with my mom about what was happening. That was the wrong place to turn for help. Ashamed, I told my mother over dinner. She said it was just discharge and that all the women in our family had it, which speaks volumes about our family. By junior high, I was a master at dissociation. I would sit in science class and stare at my own arm. It seemed utterly bizarre to me that this was my arm. How could it be my arm? What was my arm, anyway? Except for athletics, where it was safe to feel my physical self, I did not relate to being in my body. My tactic was to control my emotions and feelings, including sexual ones. In high school, I couldn't comprehend the whole blue ball thing that boys complained about. I could turn my sexual interest on and off again. Easy as that. I wondered why others couldn't do that too. As a kid, I didn't masturbate, and neighborhood games of Truth or Dare brought on huge attacks of shame if they involved anything remotely sexual. While I controlled my sexual feelings and desire, my sister's survival tactics were the opposite. Instead of controlling sex, she was out exploring with all of the neighborhood kids. She says she was considered very sophisticated about sex in our neighborhood. Once I began having consensual sex in high school, I organized my intimate life in the classic survivor split. My best friend was a guy with whom I shared my emotional life, my secrets, and my philosophical reflections. My boyfriend with whom I explored sex was someone else. I could hardly speak a word to him. I actually did love him, but was terrified to share myself with him. I could not endure emotional intimacy and sex at the same time. I froze. I was uninterested in the girls, who seemed weak and sissy-like to me. I hated pink. All my friends were boys. I didn't want to be a man, but I certainly was not going to be a woman. I identified as androgynous. It wasn't until I was exposed to feminism in college and discovered powerful female role models that I began to call myself a woman. Somatic healing. Much of my healing took place while I was a student at Oberlin College. It was a gift to find myself in the center of such a politicized and socially aware community. I knew I was not alone in surviving abuse. What I couldn't heal for myself, I healed to make a difference for the future. Brave women before me had survived sexual assault and had made my life easier by their choices. I wanted to be a part of the chain of hope for others. Having that large social context in which to see my abuse was very empowering. I organized the first incest survivors group on campus and formed a student activist group to deal with the college's inadequate response to rape on campus. I advocated for government financial support for incest survivors and won grants to fund survivors' recovery resources. Early on in recovery, I worked with someone who practiced body-oriented therapy. I was so grateful to her, or I am so grateful to her. She helped me work the trauma out of my body and opened my emotional life to me again. The abuse seemed to pour out of my body. The more I reconnected with my body, the clearer I became about what trauma was stored where. My thighs retained rage. Moving my thighs and kicking my legs allowed me to begin expressing my anger. My chest held much of the deep grief. Where my body had been pinned or frozen during the abuse, I now began to move. Where my body had been, or how many times had I wanted to push someone off of me and couldn't? I learned how to let my arms and body do that. The relief was incredible. The process was painful. I was coming back to me. I started to identify my body, not only as a shell that housed myself, but as a source of wisdom and inspiration. My body actually knew things about the healing process that I didn't. In the thawing out, I got to live inside myself again. Excuse me. Since then, I've learned that the somatic process I went through are consistent with processes of survivors of all forms of trauma. War veterans, Holocaust survivors, and even victims of severe auto accidents experience similar processes of dissociation and freezing or holding in the body. The somatic release of these holdings allows us to process and complete trauma. Through the healing, my sexuality emerged from a new place in me. It became less and less about how sex was supposed to look like and more about my own experience of sex and desire. I had been quite sexually active during my 2 years of running from the healing process, but I could not really be present while having sex. I was going 90 miles per hour in my own head. I didn't know how to say what I wanted and didn't really know I had permission to do so. As I healed, this changed. My own sexual interest and preferences emerged. From beneath the incest, I began to date women, and I have been sexual with women since then. The more the trauma poured out of me, the more I filled me in. As may be the case for you, sex triggered me. I would be having fine time and suddenly find myself feeling afraid, used, and abused. As I got turned on, images of the abuse appeared. It became impossible to separate then from now. My sexual response had become intermingled with abuse and betrayal. So when I experienced one, the other followed. Untangling these became my project. I would make lists to differentiate them. What is sex? What is abuse? I slowly learned to keep myself present, allowing myself to practice sexual turn-ons that were connected to my body and my pleasure. I felt a lot of shame and guilt. Am I allowed pleasure? If I like sex now, does that mean I wanted the abuse? Can I be the one who says what kind of touch and sex I want? I continued to release the trauma from my body. What was caught in me that I wanted to express? How could I live deeply inside of me? As I healed, it dawned on me that sexual... Excuse me. As I healed, it dawned on me that sexual energy was a positive and powerful force in my own recovery. I'm going to have to edit this. Good vibrations. From 1991 to 1995, I worked at Good Vibrations, the clean, well-lighted place for sex toys. Joni Blank founded Good Vibrations in 1977 to provide a place for women to purchase sex toys and have access to positive and accurate information about sex and their own sexuality. Her small one-room retail space with a staff of 3 has grown into 2 retail stores, a website and mail order operation, and a workforce that can barely fit into the staff photo in front of the catalog. Moreover, Good Vibration has become a leader in the field of sex education. This was a great experience for me as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, albeit challenging and triggering at times. Through my experience and training at Good Vibrations, I learned more about sex than I even knew I wanted to know. Where incest had taught me the most destructive uses of sex, here I sat amid a plethora of sex-positive information. Sex became normalized for me. All of this sex positivity balanced the scales. Now I knew both the worst and the best of sex. As a manager at Good Vibrations, however, I found myself caught repeatedly between 2 worlds, the world of survivors, hurt and at times paranoid about sex, and the world of sex-positive educators, many of whom did not want to hear about the negative uses of sex or the effects of sexual abuse. Many in the survivors community were afraid of sex and thought the best they could hope for would be something slightly better than just tolerating it. Survivors who liked sex and who spoke openly about it were met with mistrust, and even at times disdain. It was assumed they were acting out their sexual abuse. Pleasure was suspect. To me, it seemed to boil down to no trust in sex. Understandable, but not the recovery I hoped for. Among sex educators, there was little talk of sexual violence or the sexual contradictions experienced by women who have been sexually violated. In a culture where sex is simultaneously vilified and used to sell you everything you can think of, confusion and negativity about sex is rampant. The call to sex positivity and women's sexual self-definition was welcome. Still, I found myself educating the educators about the effects of childhood sexual abuse on adult sexuality. One colleague went so far to suggest that incest itself wasn't the problem, that it was the cultural taboo surrounding incest that was harmful. No, no, no. That was right in there. No, no, no. Educating the educators. So I became a bridge, talking about sex with survivors and professionals who worked with them, and talking about childhood sexual abuse with sex-positive sex educators. To me, sexual empowerment seemed a normal outgrowth of healing childhood sexual abuse and working to end the sexual abuse of children as obvious banner for the sex-positive community to fly. I found myself longing for a place where I could talk about all of it. Sex, sexual abuse, rape, and its effects on sex, and the glory and healing powers of consensual adult sexuality and embodiment. I wanted to have conversations that went further than the ABCs of childhood sexual abuse. Yes, it really does happen, and yes, it really does hurt the child. And yes, most often the abuser is someone close to the child. Or the ABCs of sex education. Yes, sex really is a natural part of being human. And yes, there are words for down there. And yes, you are allowed to ask for what you want sexually. The opportunity came when On Our Backs magazine asked me to write a series of articles in 1995. Felice Newman, co-publisher of Cleus Press, read my first article and called me, thus the beginning of this book. Healing Sex is written for women survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Male survivors of abuse will find the tools and resources useful for their recovery as well. Survivors and non-survivors alike will find the embodiment approach to sexual recovery, a refreshing antidote to the sex negativity of our culture. A path through the wreckage. Miraculously, most survivors want to find a path through the wreckages of sexual trauma to sexual enjoyment, and why not? Sex is a fundamental human drive, one that brings pleasure, delight, ease, connection, and embodiment into our lives. I see sexual healing as the cornerstone of empowerment for the hundreds and thousands of us who have been sexually molested as children. For most survivors to allow pleasure, much less embodied sexual pleasure, into their lives is a feat. Once you begin to reclaim and re-embody sexually, you can enter the place of trauma and relinquish its control over you. You can bring peace and vitality back into your life. At a recent international conference on somatics, Emil Conrad, the founder of Continuum, a somatic approach, said, "The more you are in your own experience, sensations, your own body, the less some external or authoritarian system can control you." Behind this book is a vision of ending the sexual abuse of children and building a world that is welcoming, safe, and respectful of their humanity. Embodiment and the power of reclaiming your own sexuality are both a part of this societal healing. People who are embodied, not dissociated nor anesthetized, are much less likely to abuse children or stand by while others abuse them. As a somatics practitioner, I have watched survivors return to the sensations and intelligence of their bodies as a place of healing. This book is filled with information, suggestions, and exercises to help you reoccupy your body. Waking up somatically will make you more aware of yourself and your surroundings. You will become a more powerful contributor to your family, your community, and the world. I see sexual healing as the cornerstone of empowerment for the hundreds and thousands of us who have been sexually molested as children. For most survivors, to allow pleasure, much less embodied sexual pleasure, into their lives is a feat. Once you begin to reclaim and re-embody sexually, you can take back the very ground of attack. You are returning to the center of a war zone and declaring the territory yours. You get to live your own life. I see our capacity to recover as extraordinary. I have met so many survivors, close friends, somatic clients, the women who are quoted in this book, who have been resilient through extreme abuse. The more stories I hear, the more I am stunned by the extent of the sexual abuse of children, and the more I am awed by the regenerative power of our spirits and humanity. If you are a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, ready to begin this journey, congratulations. I hope that this book brings you healing, along with pleasure, hope, and laughter. I wish you a satisfying, embodied sex life, a life that is your own lovely creation. You are more powerful than what happened to you. So, that's the introduction and the promise. It's not going to be an easy read. I imagine that this might be hard for a lot of you out there, but I just want to promise you that I'm here for you. And if you ever want to talk, there are lots of people who are willing to receive you on this, and you're not alone. There are so many people, unfortunately, that have experienced this in their lives. A lot of people in my life. A lot of people that are very close in my life. And, myself included. I love you. I hope you're well. And we're going to get through this together.